Hello and welcome back to another Warlords of Draenor video. So today's one is going to be about potential issues with the expansion. Now I just want to make it clear that on the whole I'm actually feeling quite positive about this expansion, really looking forward to it, and if you want to see the things that I'm looking forward to the most, then I'd recommend checking out, I think it was my video last Tuesday, about just some of the awesome things, but of course, nothing is without any problems or any potential issues. So in this video, I'm going to run you through a few of the potential issues, maybe offer a few ideas and solutions, and hopefully we can have a nice little discussion with the whole thing. So this is a point that's really been on my mind for quite a while, and that is the idea that Warlords of Draenor's full potential might not be realized, and especially just the setting of Draenor itself. So we recently found out that the Farallon patch might not happen. We also found out that Tanaan Jungle will be a future content patch, and that they might only be doing 2 raid tiers in this expansion, essentially meaning that it would be a roughly 1 year long X-Pack. I think that this could lead to them not really using Draenor to its full potential, especially in regards to Farallon, which, by the way, is the place that turned into bloody Netherstorm. I mean, come on, there's bound to be some cool stuff they could have done with that. In fact, I've got an idea for that zone that I think would be really cool that involves twisting past events with the Naru arriving, but that is a video for another day. Anyway, so this whole Tanaan thing doesn't really help out the zone variety issue when it comes to leveling. At least having a zone worth of choice would have been nice in the expansion, but we just don't have that. Another thing is that Tanaan is kind of like where most of the Iron Horde's big stuff is, and well, you know, the leveling finishes off in Nagrand, and that's where the story of the leveling experience finishes, but it doesn't feel like you really end your big quest. No, it just feels like that's the end of the Nagrand story. It would have been nice if everything was tied into something that maybe even just involved us going into some sort of initial foray into Tanaan Jungle and then maybe stopping at the gates of the Iron Horde's big citadel place. Anyway, so yeah, a little bit unfortunate in that regard. Then we will also have to see just how the patches play out in Warlords of Draenor. It's hard to speculate, but I've always found that the mid-expansion patches are super creative, so things like Ulduar, Throne of Thunder, and Firelands all brought something interesting to the table. If it does indeed end up being a 2 raid patch expansion, then perhaps we won't see one of those really interesting patches, which could be sort of unfortunate. Overall, these decisions between, Farallon, Tanaan being kind of deferred to a patch and then the whole 2 raid tier thing, just have me a little bit worried that the full potential of the Draenor setting might not be realized by Blizzard, which is a pity because I think there was a lot of fantastic content to be had. Another potential issue with Warlords of Draenor is the linear zone progression while you're leveling. Now this is a little bit of a sad one. So as far as zone progression goes, the leveling is basically the most linear yet. There is quite literally zero choice. You begin in your faction starter zone, that's either Shadowmoon Valley or Frostfire Ridge, after of course doing the Tanaan Jungle intro experience, but then after that you go to Gorgrond, then you go to Talador, then you go to the Spires of Iraq, then you finish at Nagrand. There is no choice there, which is rather unfortunate. Now one plus point is that within these zones you do get to choose between a different outpost in each zone. Now these will give you an associated perk and questline. While this is cool, I don't think it's going to be enough to make more than 2 playthroughs feel particularly different. I mean, it's just not a lot, but hey, at least it's something, so that's nice. You know, I remember I hate to say back in the day because it's got so many connotations of rose-tinted glasses and all that, but do you remember back in Northrend where you would have 2 different starter zones, that either faction could go to? You had 2 different 78 to 80 zones, and you could usually skip one of the zones in between those brackets. This meant that there was enough content to really just make, 4 alts feel very different to each other in terms of the leveling up experience. So yeah, that's not going to happen in Warlords of Draenor. Now, while I do think that the leveling content is the best yet in terms of quality, I still think this is going to be a rather large problem for those like me who have got multiple alts. Though personally, I do find that despite this leveling being linear, I haven't really grown tired of it during Warlords of Draenor. I mean, sure, it's perhaps lost its shine, but really I kind of saved myself up for the Warlords leveling and I waited until they put in all the voice acting and the cool stuff, so I really did get the full experience when I did level. Anyway, so I've leveled a beta character to 100, and then I put other ones through most of the zones, yet I'm still looking forward to getting stuck into it on my main character, so I suppose that does bode well, and it is a mark of the improved quality of the questing. However, there's still room for improvement, and when something can be improved, I think what we should as players do is say, hey Blizzard, improve this, so you make your game better. that just makes sense. Honestly, I'd say that more zone variation would be good, and one way of doing that would just be to give the player a choice. You know, maybe after you finish the Shadowmoon Valley questline, Yril goes off to one zone and Murad goes off to another zone, and you say, hey, okay, Yril, I'll go with you to this zone, and, you know, it wouldn't have any impact on the story because you'd still find out what Murad would have done, but it would have meant that on 2 different alts, well, you've got 2 different zones you could go to for the same level bracket. I think an idea like that would be pretty cool in the expansion after Warlords of Draenor. Yeah, so there's still not enough dungeons, and I'm not going to shut up about this one. 7 new dungeons and 1 revamped one just isn't enough. Sure, the dungeons are really pretty and high quality, but unfortunately for Blizzard and Warlords, aesthetics do grow old quicker than mechanics do. If you have an excellent set of mechanics implemented, then they will be far more timeless in comparison to just making something that's pretty. Now, thankfully, the increased difficulty of the Warlords of Draenor dungeons pretty much means that they are going to last a bit more than, say, if it was MOP difficulty. Basically, on a mechanical level, the dungeons that are here are actually really, really solid. It's one of the things that I've actually been the most impressed about. Still, though, I personally think that what they should have done is went for winged dungeons just like Wrath and the Burning Crusade. This was great, as one tile set could result in 2 to 3 dungeons and then many more encounters. And even if a tile set is the same, the dungeon could feel different. So for an example, I think that Utgard, the Utgard dungeons, the Ulduar dungeons, and the ICC dungeons all felt really different from a mechanical perspective, but it was all, like, there was a lot of content there. And I'd say that having multiple dungeons per tile set would give people just overall more encounters and more mechanics to deal with. And as I said, mechanics generally have got more longevity than visuals. This could just be a system that would last longer and could keep people engaged for longer, especially when we've got things like challenge modes which further extend the life of dungeons. Now, speaking of challenge modes, on the bright side, actually challenge modes will give you a chance of getting 640 gear, which is high mall LFR quality. Now, this actually means that CMs are going to be quite a bit more important in this expansion. And really, I think that challenge modes are a lot of fun as they mix an even harder difficulty level with some time trial elements, so they should really extend the life of these dungeons, and I'm really keen to see how the excellent mechanics of these dungeons translate into challenge modes. So overall, I'd say with dungeons, like, what we've got is good, the challenge mode stuff is great, hopefully they add some more ones as the expansion, continues, but personally, I would like maybe 10 or 11 dungeons rather than just 7 new ones and a revamp. One of the pretty big issues with Warlords of Draenor is actually the Apexis shard grind. Now, this Apexis shard gear is kinda like Valor Point gear in past expansions. It's meant to be something to just allow for more varied gear acquisition at the start of the expansion. The problem is that the gear can get super pricey. I've already done a discussion video on the channel about this, but I'm going to summarize it here because, of course, it is a potential problem with Warlords of Draenor. Now then, this gear starts off at Heroic Dungeon item level. You can then upgrade it to High Mall LFR, and then finally you can upgrade it to Blackrock Foundry LFR. This gear is purchased with Apexis shards, which are obtained by doing a single large daily quest every day, and then also by grinding some various kinds of level 100 mobs. Now, these quests that you get, well, they'll be one a day, they'll send you out to the various level 100 subzones, and while you're there, you kill some mobs, you click on things, and you fill up a bar, just like a Renown Heart in Guild Wars 2. Now, this is better than patch 5.0, but it still is very repetitive. Another issue is that the gear itself is super expensive, and really, if it wasn't for the gear pricing issue, then this wouldn't be on this list, really. Now, the level 1 gear costs from 3 to 5k each. That's fine, totally obtainable, awesome. The level 2 gear, though, costs the price of the level 1 gear plus an additional 7 to 11k. Now, do remember, all of these numbers are per piece. And then finally, the level 3 gear costs the level 2 piece plus an additional 17 to 20k, meaning that a fully, a level 3 bit of gear will have cost you about, 36,500 Apexis shards? Now, I've got to say, that's pretty mental, especially when you consider that if you do all these various methods per day, you'll be getting like 900 to 1400, depending on how much grinding and stuff you do, which really is kind of problematic. The missions themselves, by the way, drop 800 or 1000 if it's one of the group missions. I really do think that this is an inordinate amount of time to get this gear. Now, if that time was spent doing, super fun things, then I'd be happy, but it's spent doing repetitive tasks. Now, my issue here is not really with the time sunk, it's more of the fact that it's day in, day out doing the same thing with these daily missions that I don't think are particularly fun. So yeah, I think the daily missions themselves could be revamped and all that, but more importantly, if they wanted to just do a quick band-aid fix to get this in a more acceptable state quickly, then they should just make the cost of the Apexis crystal gear actually make sense. Now, I do think that the initial heroic dungeon level is a totally cool amount of, price, whatever, but it's just the additional upgrades that I think are too expensive. Now, do remember that this is kind of offset by the fact that you can get crafted gear, PvP gear, and then some bits of gear from your garrison, so that does somewhat mitigate the problem, but really, I just think that Blizzard can do better, and also this will be especially painful if you want to gear up, I don't know, say 5 or 6 characters. The missions themselves only take like 20 minutes, maybe 30 if you're really slow, but it's not crazy. It's just the fact that it's not particularly fun, and it's paced so that you just do so much. I think maybe if they added a bit more variation to the Apexis crystal gathering, then that would be good, but yeah, on the whole, I just think it's a bit of a problematic system. If you want my full thoughts, probably best to check out the video because I go pretty in-depth in it. Another rather unfortunate thing in Warlords of Draenor is that they're not adding another Battleground. This is a bit of a pity, but I want to say that first of all, of course, there's a lot of content in Ashran. It's a pretty cool place, and now that I've been playing more of it, especially when the beta servers aren't crammed, I've got to say it really is quite fun. I still maintain that Ashran 100 versus 100 is not that fun, but maybe 50v50, 40v40 is just a more playable experience. Anyway, so I've only got a passing interest in PvP combat, but still, I would like a new Battleground or two. Whenever there's a new Battleground, I generally enjoy checking it out, and when I'm maybe a little bit bored in a patch, I will generally hop onto one of my characters and try to get some PvP gear and have fun that way. But in Warlords, there is no new Battleground. Now, there is one little bit of good news for the initial period of Warlords, and that is that the 10th anniversary of WoW is going to bring the 40 versus 40 South Shore versus Tarren Mill Battleground. Now, I know that many people have actually asked for a team deathmatch or even a deathmatch Battleground, so if this Tarren Mill versus South Shore thing goes off pretty well, then perhaps Blizzard might consider implementing a full Battleground of that style. Certainly, I'd say that if you enjoy that content once it comes out, be sure to let them know on the forums. That's generally a good place to leave feedback. And really, I think they could make a cool TDM Battleground. Perhaps it could be inside a giant Iron Horde foundry, and maybe in addition to killing the enemy team, you could have some fun side objectives, like maybe, I don't know, pots of molten iron that you could spill across the room. Maybe you could do things with like a lava elemental or just unleashing lava that could change the map a little bit. Perhaps you could have conveyor belts that have maybe got environmental hazards on them. Lots of stuff to just spice it up and make it interesting, and prevent it from being a bunch of people standing in the middle of the room eating away at each other's health bars. Because really, that kind of gameplay doesn't work out too well if you're on a 10v10 or a 20 versus 20. Still though, I think new Battlegrounds would be great, more variation is great, and a lot of people do enjoy Battlegrounds and even rated Battlegrounds, so it's a bit of a pity that there's no content there at 6.0 for those people. Another issue with Warlords of Draenor is that really too much of it, in my opinion, is centralized within your garrison. Look, you're going to be spending a lot of time in your garrison, it's pretty crazy. Just about every single bit of content kind of sucks you into your garrison in one way or the other. Now, I suppose that's cool because garrisons are supposed to be the big feature of Warlords of Draenor. However, I'm just a little bit worried that this is going to result in people always idling in their garrisons, never really, leaving, and just kind of resulting in some cities and just parts of the world feeling rather empty. That could be a bit of an issue. And also just in terms of visual differentiation, people are perhaps going to get tired of the garrison pretty darn quick, especially since the garrison is just themed off the traditional Elwyn Forest / Durotar style. I just think that could get a little bit dull for people over time. Now, one good bit of news is that there is a separate garrison Hearthstone, and there's also a port to Ashran inside your garrison, so traveling around the place isn't really a pain at all. And if for some, if a particular city really is your favorite city to hang out in, you'll still be able to do that and then have another hearth that points towards your garrison. Now, you will be able to access pretty much everything from your garrison depending on how you build it. That actually includes the auction house and banks. Traditionally, expansion hubs wouldn't have so much functionality, which meant that Stormwind and Orgrimmar generally felt pretty alive. However, this will not be the case anymore. Ashran has an AH, and then of course you can get the AH and the banks within your garrison, so really they are just funneling you into the garrison. Even the expansion's daily quests funnel you into the garrison. Just about a lot of things really keep you in the Garrison. A lot of the daily content also comes from your Garrison buildings. So you're really just going to be spending, at least for 6.0, a lot of your time surrounding kind of one location. Sure, it'll be sending you off into other parts of the world, but you'll always be coming back to the same place. And I would just worry that perhaps that would get a little bit old for some people. Overall, I just think it's a bit strange to centralize people inside a phased area in which they will only see themselves. Maybe it just feels a little bit counterproductive to so many of the social aspects of an MMO. Okay, so another issue is one that's really been beaten to death, and that's the loss of the cool hubs, being, Bladespire and Karabor. Now, as much as I do think the Ashran hubs have turned out really well considering what they had to work with, I still think it's a big pity that Bladespire and Karabor were not fully implemented. I'll try to keep this point brief, but suffice to say that it really will get old spending our time in either our faction-themed Garrison or our faction-themed Ashran hub, especially since the Cataclysm changes that had us hanging out in Stormwind and Orgrimmar for 4 years. It's like we spent so much time in those cities, then we had things like, say, patch 5.1, and that's just an aesthetic that we really have seen a lot of, especially for the Horde players, with the Siege of Orgrimmar. And I just think that while the Ashran hubs totally do the hub job very well, it isn't something that's going to be as memorable and as iconic as past hubs. They had an excellent opportunity to do something really ambitious with Bladespire and Karabor, and it's sad to see that that didn't really happen. Certainly, I hope that they try to make a really cool hub city that feels different in the next expansion. Something on the same level as Shattrath or Dalaran would be lovely. If you just think about it, players often think back to old Shattrath and think back to Dalaran, and they just felt like such important fixtures within the world. Yet, when we move into, say, Cataclysm, well, it was just Stormwind and Orgrimmar, which we all kind of knew. But then also, even in Pandaria, I'd say that in a few years, we will still think, oh yeah, the Veil of Eternal Blossoms, that was a pretty cool thing. But now it's just going to be like, oh yeah, that Alliance camp in the island. That's not particularly unique and interesting. Many players have suggested that they could perhaps unlock Bladespire and Karabor as a hub in the subsequent patch. However, Blizzard has said that that's not going to happen, and I actually agree with them. I don't think that would be an appropriate use of their resources, and really I would prefer they just make their raid better or make some new dungeons or something like that with the art resources that might take. Okay, so the next point is cookie cutter garrisons. This is something I've already done a video on, so I'll be really brief here. Now, this is mainly an issue for the PvE players. However, I suppose it does kind of affect the PvE people too, because of course, PvE gear is still sort of useful in PvP. Anyway, so when Warlords of Draenor launches, there will be only really 1 or 2 garrison configurations that make sense for someone who's a PvE player who wants to get the maximum throughput, especially if you're a raider. And that's a bit of a problem, because there are lots of fun buildings that truly are extremely fun, but they don't help you out with gear. So many people are just going to defer using those buildings for quite a while. An example would be the stable and the mage tower. The stable provides access to some nice little buffs and also some new mounts, and the mage tower lets you port around Draenor. These are both really fun, but they won't help you gear like the barracks and the bunker will. So if you're a PvE player, you're gonna get a barracks and a bunker, that's just how it's gonna work. So it's a bit of a problem. Now, I do think it's a problem that will be alleviated over time, especially once people get over the expansion's initial gear hike. So really, once you've got lots of highly geared and upgraded followers, you're not going to need a barracks. And once you maybe have got enough resources so you can always get your bonus roll coins and your followers are also really upgraded, then maybe you won't need the bunker/armory building. So a lot of space will kind of free up over time, but at least initially, you're going to be kind of very driven into 1 or 2 particular configurations. I think that this problem could perhaps be solved by maybe an extra medium or large building slot, so hopefully they decide to add that in a future content patch. Still though, I think that this may be a bit of a necessary evil. All of these buildings need to be compelling and powerful if players are actually going to care, and I'd rather have powerful yet optimal buildings over a selection of muted yet boring buildings. So I think maybe this is going to work out for the best, but it certainly is an issue that a lot of people have brought up. Okay then, so time to tackle the issue of the sort of air quotes Diablo loot system. Now, many people have brought up the idea of the loot being increasingly similar to that in Diablo. This is mainly because gear can be warforged, can proc extra gem sockets, and it can also have these additional minor stats. Now, the Warforged stuff and additional gem sockets have obviously got an effect on your throughput, but the minor stats don't really have much of an effect on that. Anyway, so this system means that getting a full set of perfect bind, better best in slot gear is essentially impossible. But realistically, the difference in power between a regular drop and a Warforged one is not terribly massive, and if you think about how much RNG can harm you as a player, RNG is going to harm you far less in this situation, rather than in the situation where you may or may not actually get a piece of gear. So I don't think this is a ginormous issue, but it certainly is going to have a few problems. Now, this randomized system has essentially just been added to make subsequent raid tiers a bit more rewarding for players. Even if you have an item, well, you could get lucky and get a better version of that item. For an example, if your guild is farming, or not even farming, I'm just trying to down the final boss of an instance, well, on your farm clears, even if you have some of that gear, you're still going to have the chance of getting a version of your chest that, instead of just being the regular version, is also Warforged, or maybe also has a gem socket, or perhaps even both. Now, I do think that while that stuff is fun and I can understand why Blizzard are putting it in, it does have some problems. Many raiders were just not too keen on the whole Warforged system, especially in regards to what it did for, say, loot rules and just general balancing and things like that. And, I have seen a lot of people complain about it being in Warlords of Draenor, especially since it is being expanded upon. I think that while the power difference between a bit of Warforged gear and a bit of regular gear, well, while certainly it is noticeable, it's not game-breaking. There is a bit of an issue, I think, with a bit of gear that actually has got both sockets and Warforged. I mean, that really is very powerful, and that's just going to bring up interesting social issues for guilds as they progress through these raids and try to deal out gear to their members in a way that at least seems fair. It's just one of those examples of RNG kind of being weird, and a lot of players are not really comfortable with that. Though, of course, I would remind you that our loot system is based on RNG. Loot does drop randomly, and the randomness from that is far more of a factor than the randomness from these little procs, though I still do see the issue. Another point is that the minor stats are actually really crap. They're just not very powerful. Like, they're tuned so that they're not game-breakingly powerful, so that they don't really feel like something that you need to have, but that just translates to them being really boring and just extra clutter that doesn't really have any particular interesting value. Now, the one that could be kind of powerful would be the run speed one. I think it's a bit crazy that's a tertiary stat or a minor stat. I don't know why that's even in the game, honestly. But the other ones range from being completely pointless to just so weak it's not even interesting. So yeah, I think they really do need to have another look at that minor stat system, but overall, I don't think we're going to see much of a change with this loot system. Okay, so there is yet another Garrison issue, and this is just the Garrison missions. Now, I think that really this is more of an inherent design thing, and just in case you're not aware, there is a system with Garrisons in which you can send your followers off on missions. It's really in the same vein as Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and the many similar sort of systems that, were sort of based off that. Now, as you do these missions, you can upgrade your followers' gear to gain access to harder missions. And your followers have got many different traits and things like that, which will be either good or whatever in various missions. As far as these systems go, it's definitely one of the best implemented ones. However, sadly, I think there are some problems that lie at its core. It's a loot progression system that is essentially wrapped around a menu, rather than being one that is wrapped around actual gameplay with your character. Now sure, you can argue that clicking on menu items is gameplay, but really I think you get my drift. It's not high octane, it's not particularly thrilling. Now, this system can provide the satisfaction of progression, however, the act of, progressing isn't particularly fun because it's just click on the thing, come back in 8 hours, or come back in 2 hours, or however long the missions take. Though really, this could just be an inherent problem with this kind of gameplay, but honestly, I don't think it's really an excuse for Blizzard to not try to shake the formula up, after Blizzard are pretty damn good at making games, as I'm sure we all think. And, yeah, we should hold them up to a high standard. Now, I'm not too sure what they would implement here by way of, trying to spice up this style of gameplay, but I think that they could have done something that involves your character. Perhaps you could, on occasion, get a rare mission that is sort of similar to a scenario, but is kind of like a solo scenario with your followers. They could maybe implement some cool AI with them, and, it could be as simple as, say, intercepting an Iron Horde supply caravan. In fact, if they were to go with that, then I'd say they should just do simple objectives, but then play around with randomization. So maybe, you know, the scenario could be an Iron Horde supply caravan, but maybe you could get it in a variety of different locations with different enemies and maybe even different mini-bosses. And for example, one week you could, interrupt supply caravan X in Shadow Moon Valley, and maybe another week you could assassinate a high-ranking soldier and their guards in the Grand. It could be all varied up like that, and I'm sure they could do some nifty AI to allow your followers to be clever and maybe act like they are tanks, DPSs, and healers. Maybe you could give them basic orders. I don't know, it's just an idea, but I think that the mission system would have been enhanced if they had some way to proc a rare mission that involves your character. Basically, that's just a random idea, but Blizzard are the people who should be able to come up with the killer idea that really makes that form of kind of follower/mission gameplay really interesting. Another major issue in Warlords of Draenor is how they are handling reputations. Now, I have already done a video on this topic, but essentially all of the reputations play out like Xiaohao. Essentially, it's all mob grinding, and basically certain level 100 subzones will be populated with mobs that are related to a certain reputation, and rep is earned by killing those rare mobs, and then of course the rare spawns that appear in those areas. Now, you will get a decent amount of rep with most of the factions by just leveling up, as they do all have related quests. However, this will only get you so far, and you will have to grind out a lot of mobs if you want to get anywhere. Now, I think that this is good for some people and bad for others, but overall, variation is just so important, and it is the key to fixing this issue. Some people love to just be able to grind out a rep in a few sittings super quick. Maybe if you have 6 hours free in one day, and what you want to do is just go to Shatrath City and kill stuff, well, you know what? You can do that, fair enough. That doesn't take away from really anyone else in the game. That's fine. And sometimes I'm in that category, actually. But having this gameplay shouldn't mean that we can't have others like, for example, reputations from relevant dungeons, story quests that are attached to factions, the odd daily quest, or maybe even things like discovering treasures and stuff like that in the world. There just isn't enough meat in the bones of this system, and while I'm completely okay with there being a mob grind element at some point, I just think that they could add more to make it a more fleshed out and engaging experience. I just think it's pretty sad because a lot of these reps have got really, really awesome cosmetic rewards like transmog sets and mounts, but the gameplay just isn't varied enough for it to be hyper interesting. Though one plus side of all this stuff is that no actual stat gear is behind these reps, so they are totally optional. There won't be a repeat of the 5.0 situation where you're going around doing millions of reps a day and all that stuff. It's totally optional, but still, I think that's not an excuse for the content not really meeting its full potential. Okay, time to talk about professions. Now, this is something that I'm including in this list because I've seen a lot of people talk about professions, and I've seen a lot of people bring up some valid concerns about the profession shakeup. Personally, I think that, sure, there are a few downsides, but it could be really cool. Anyway, so the knock-on effect from the Garrison profession system is that stuff's really different. They've essentially used Garrisons as a way to revamp professions. Now, basically, you'll be able to access quite a lot of profession-related stuff from your Garrison, even if you don't have said profession. So you could still get some blacksmithing stuff from the blacksmithing Garrison building, even if you weren't a blacksmith. This means that relatively, having professions might matter just a little bit less, probably more so for the professions that create consumables like potions. However, do bear in mind that the best potions and enchants will only be available to people with the actual profession on their character. Anyway, this will likely have an interesting effect on the economy, as many more people will be able to craft some of the basic things that they will need in their day-to-day gameplay. Also, people who want to craft will have to get a Garrison building that matches up with their crafting profession. You see, if you have both the profession and the building, then you'll be able to get double the amount of the daily cooldown resource, which really makes it rather essential. This isn't really much of a hassle though, but I can see a lot of people feel like maybe this is being forced on them, or something like that. Anyway, however, one of the really good aspects of this is that for many people, it is going to provide additional gameplay, so you'll be sustaining yourself, crafting this stuff and maybe even making some stuff to sell. There could be good gameplay in there. So for an example, if you wanted to make some leather stuff, well, you'd build a barn, you'd go off to the Grand, you'd trap some animals, then you'd go to your mine in your Garrison, you'd get some ore, and you do all your stuff and hand in your work orders, and that's just a perhaps rewarding time sink that a lot of people could get some enjoyment out of. So overall, I think that this system could work quite well. However, just do remember that this video is about potential problems, and while I think there are many positives to the profession changes, I think that it may alienate some of the really hardcore profession people from the past expansions. Plus, it could also mess up the economy a little bit by giving so many people access to the basic crafting. Really, we're just going to have to see how this one pans out. Alright, so this is a really small point, but I think there's actually a decent amount of player confusion as far as the story and lore of Warlords of Draenor goes. Now, this won't be a problem within the actual expansion story, because it is told very well, but Blizzard have not done a very good job of communicating the story of Warlords of Draenor in Mists of Pandaria. Now, the out-of-game stuff like Lords of War and the cinematic has been some of their best work yet, and I've absolutely loved it, and I'm sure that most of you watching this video are going to know exactly what's going on with the alt universe, but I think that many people will have no clue because Blizzard never really explained it. In-game, what is this alternate universe? What are the time travel rules? Are we time traveling? Is Draenor coming forward to us? Are we going back to them? These are all questions that I've seen in multiple forums and YouTube comments and all that stuff. Personally, I think it really is a pity that patch 5.5 didn't happen. You know, looking back on it, I don't think 5.5 would have really delayed Warlords of Draenor. Originally, they scrapped 5.5 because they wanted to get Warlords out super quick. However, the expansion was then delayed by 6 months, as we later found out in a developer interview. If 5.5 could have just happened, it would have been great, because we would have then understood, or at least players who just played the game and didn't really pay attention to the external material, would have understood what was going on with the time travel. They would have known what the events of, say, the War Crimes novel were. And all this stuff would have been really great, but it's just sad that they just couldn't find the time to make it happen. The story within the Warlords of Draenor questing is truly fantastic, and I just hope that for lots of people it doesn't end up being marred in confusion and all of that. Oh, and I suppose for players who have maybe taken a few years out of World of Warcraft, it might be super confusing just working out what the hell's going on. Really, at this stage, I don't think there's any solution to this problem, it's just something that was worth mentioning. So, to conclude this video, I think that Warlords of Draenor really does bring a lot of great stuff. But of course, as with everything that exists, you know, all pluses come with their minuses. Warlords of Draenor is not perfect, and I'm sure that after this expansion, Blizzard will have learned a lot of really important lessons when it comes to making expansions, as they really do with every expansion, especially MoP. You know, big just thumbs up to Blizzard for learning a lot from MoP, actually. Now then, I think that one thing you'll probably notice in this video is that many of the points also did mention 1 or 2 plus points and, you know, good sides. So I think that this has done a pretty decent job of just talking about some of the potential problems. If you foresee any problems that I haven't covered from your beta experience, then be sure to let me know in the comments. And other than that, just, you know, have a nice day, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.